Well, hey, Gundam Maniacs, welcome to another episode of Gundam Explained. In this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit more about what we know from the Gundam live-action movie. In fact, I went ahead and checked some of Jim Mickle's other work, like Sweet Tooth, to kind of get an idea, and actually, I'm very hopeful. Let me dive into that. All right, it started with this comment I got on my video. Check that out if you haven't, kind of the news of Jim Mickle being the director for the Gundam live-action movie. This is from Demsring. I hope I'm saying that right. I thought Mickle's directing of Sweet Tooth was great. He's really knows how to get the most out of actors, especially child actors, in each scene. He also knows how to set up the end of each episode to make you wanting more. In Sweet Tooth, we follow a young boy who is the key to saving humankind as he builds up friends and allies to fight against an oppressive evil. But the definition of what's good and what's evil become very confusing. Sound familiar? Very Amuro-esque. Yeah, and I thought, hey, that's a really cool synopsis, so let me check out Sweet Tooth, and that I did. So, you know, one of the main things about Sweet Tooth, developed based off of a comic. So this is an adaptation, and that's kind of what we want to get out of Gundam. At least me personally, I want an adaptation of the original 0079. So doing an adaptation of this comic, Sweet Tooth, what's very interesting, so Jim Mickle's the showrunner. He also directed this episode that I checked out. Now, I gotta say, the premise itself is something I'm not really into, but I can't really knock it because that's just, it's not my thing. Everything else surrounding this, though, is amazing, from the cinematography, which I'm really big about cinematography. Also, the acting really pulling you in, and the world building. To me, world building is such a key component of not only Gundam, but great storytelling, because you want to see these characters and who they are as they're reacting to the world around them. So what happens at the beginning of Sweet Tooth is something similar to Gundam, where there's a narration. It's sort of explaining why the world is the way it is. Does that sound familiar? It's kind of like the opening to the original 0079 with the colony drop explaining how we got to the 1-year war. But then as we get that opening, it also then starts going into like a disaster scenario. And I think this is very important in Gundam storytelling. We see it in the original 0079 when the Zaku-2s first get into the colony that Amuro and the White Base crew are at, and it's a disaster scenario. You're seeing things around blowing up, casualties of innocents just trying to escape. So a lot of the stuff that evokes Gundam is definitely in this show, and I was so happy to see that. And so that also has to do a lot with special effects. There's not only special effects where characters are having to react to things obviously added in later to make it realistic, things that are larger than life, like explosions, natural disaster scenes. There's even a scene where they're inside their car and a helicopter gets hit and goes flying down. And I thought that was a great looking scene because we're seeing it from the point of view of those that are in the car. And that's kind of what we want to see out of Gundam, is point of view from human characters that we can relate to as they're seeing these giant walking robots. So he's nailing it there. And to bring this up, the main story follows Gus, a naive 12-year-old deer hybrid who sets out to find his mother after the death of his father. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here that we can completely relate to Gundam, the original Gundam storytelling, that has to do with younger kids that are caught up in the world and what's going on, even death of parents. You know, that's something that characters in Gundam have to deal with normally. The other interesting thing too here is the fact that there's CGI and other effects that are used on some of the characters because of this weird, like I was bringing up, hybrid babies that kind of have animal characteristics. Like I was talking about before with like the explosions that are happening or the world building disaster scenario, there's a lot of special effects that are going to have to go on through a Gundam show, along with acting coming from a younger cast. And this show is pulling it off, and so again, that makes me very hopeful for this Gundam series. And so Netflix is getting yet another adaptation of a comic from Jim Mickle, so that's kind of what's interesting. I don't know if it's exactly been confirmed that this is no longer being distributed by Netflix. It just, I guess, kind of coincidence that this guy is doing adaptations and that of comics, you know, anime, comics, whatever, and that it's being distributed on Netflix. But here's God Country, Netflix comic movie adaptation, what we know so far. Jim Mickle, co-creator and showrunner of Netflix hit Sweet Tooth, is set to direct God Country, originally announced in December 2021. He's also co-writing the movie screenplay with one of the original comic book authors, Donny Cates. So what I'm seeing so far with Sweet Tooth, with God Country, is working closely with the source material, and that's why, again, I'm hopeful that this Gundam live-action movie is going to be an adaptation of what we know from 0079. God Country will be another entry in a list of collaborations between Netflix and Legendary Entertainment. Again, Legendary doing the Gundam. Oh, it even says Gundam live-action movie here, even though this was before the new news. Now, I couldn't find much information on God Country other than maybe reading the comic, but let's see what this says. Emmett Quinlan, an old widower rattled by dementia, isn't just a problem for his children. His violent outbursts are more than the local cops can handle when a tornado levels his home as well as the surrounding West Texas town. A restored Quinlan rises from the wreckage. The enchanted sword at the eye of the storm gives him more than a sound mind and body. However, he's now the only man who can face the otherworldly creatures the sword has drawn down the Lone Star State. So, really strange synopsis. First time I'm really hearing about this God Country thing, but it has a lot of interesting elements to it that does, require an understanding, I guess, of shooting when it comes to VFX. Obviously, from what we were looking at with Sweet Tooth is showing the special effects. Again, this is the shot when they're looking out the car, two helicopters collide, explode. All right, so, at the end of the day here, I am super stoked about Jim Mickle directing this Gundam live-action movie. I was fine with Jordan Vogt-Roberts being the director. I didn't think there would be any problem with that. But I think with Jim Mickle, we're actually seeing more, or I'm seeing more, that can really directly connect and relate to the Gundam storytelling, because I think world building is key, and the fact that he is used to directing younger cast members while doing world building, I think it speaks a lot to what we could get out of this. Also, as a film snob in a way, to where I really like good acting on good cinematography. What I saw from this first episode looked brilliant. Again, I don't care about the premise too much. I'm not really into animal hybrid, that fantasy thing. That's a neat story. I don't care, but I can still appreciate everything else that's going on. The acting is fantastic. Again, the cinematography, the storytelling, the setups, the fact that it's mostly world building that our characters are reacting to. I think if anyone was worried about the Gundam live action show or movie, you probably don't even need to be anymore. So anyway, I'm curious what you all think. In fact, have you seen Sweet Tooth? Thanks for the commenter that brought that up for me to check out, because I think it was definitely worth checking it out. And I don't know, also, what about it being based on 0079? I hope the live action movie is based on the original 0079. There's a lot that original show did in terms of the cinematography. With animation, there's a lot more deliberateness that's put into each shot as it's telling a story, as it's showing these mobile suits being larger than life. But if it wasn't that, what would it be? And is there anything else that Jim Mickle has done that could directly relate to maybe another Gundam? Anyway, let me know what you think, all. Thanks for watching. We'll talk later.